Hello, listeners. Another great episode of Been There and Done That here, brought to you by the Coffee Commune. I'm Phil Di Bella, and today we're going to talk all things legal. And what we're going to do today is we're actually going to have a very special guest, and I know this firsthand because I use this firm and this person for all of my stuff, and I love promoting people that I can actually tell you know their stuff and have been there and done that. So let me introduce to you Rob from Hillhouse Lawyers. Rob is the principal and director of the company. So we're talking to one of the owners of the company, and he knows his stuff. Thanks for joining me, Robert.
Thanks, Phil.
Now, Rob is okay?
Rob's fine, yeah.
Rob's fine. So here we go. Let's first thing I want listeners to think about is, they hear lawyers, they hear accountants, and they start to freak out. Don't freak out. I can tell you this again firsthand, and in the spirit of everything we talk about, it's called Been There, Done That for a reason. And Rob has been there and done that on many occasions. He's worked with myself, and he's worked with many of our other clients and members of the commune. So what we're going to hear today, we're going to talk a little bit about IP, we're going to talk a little bit about compliance, we're going to talk about employment, we're going to talk about supply agreements, leasing, and of course, if you need to deep dive on any of these matters, we'll have all of Rob and Hillhouse Lawyers details where you can further contact them. So, Rob, you ready to rock and roll?
Ready to go.
Now, don't get all lawyer on me, mate. Remember, plain English, us cafe owners are very simple people. You know this from working with me. I always talk about treat me like I'm a dishwasher because that's how I started in the industry. So, first, let's talk about, can you explain the importance of choosing the right legal structure for your cafe? Let's go right to the beginning. So if someone's looking at opening a cafe, or you have opened a cafe, that's okay. It's a good time to start looking at your legal structure. So Rob, talk us through that. What's the right legal structure to own a cafe?
So there's probably no right legal structure per se. Bit of Latin for you, Phil.
Yeah.
And you probably need to talk, as well as lawyers being important, accountants are also very important in this process. So if you've got a good lawyer and a good accountant, you're in a long way to having a good business. So if you've got to the stage where this is what I want to do, this is my passion, then talk to those people. Now, there's different sorts of legal structures for different sorts of cafes. Like someone like Phil Di Bella, for say, you wouldn't be opening in your own name.
Yeah.
From a legal point of view.
Correct,
you'd use your name, but you wouldn't be.
So it wouldn't be a sole proprietor.
Correct. You wouldn't be a sole trader with your own ABN. Now, but, Rob Lamb opening up a cafe, that might be suitable.
Yeah.
Now, there's other structures, such as companies are probably the one that most people are familiar with. So a company's where is a legal entity by itself, but the shareholders own it. And it can often be people with their partner, like their life partner, as it were, or business partners as well. Then you can have a partnership. Sometimes people will have a partnership. That's not quite as effective in sort of taxation-wise, accounting-wise, generally, and there's liabilities that come with partnership that aren't that attractive usually. But often, and this is why the accountants are important to speak to, is often under those structures you'll have a trust.
Yeah.
So you can direct the funds and the profits that you hopefully make into a trust and deal with them in a tax effective way and in an asset protection way. So importantly, get that advice early and talk to your accountant and talk to us at Hillhouse before you start signing documents in that regard.
And again, even if you're in a business, and the reason I say this, obviously I've been in this industry now for 30 plus years and owned my own business for 22 years. I built Australia's largest specialty coffee company, but I never thought it would become that big.
Yes,
and if I'd gotten the right legal advice and the right accountant advice from day dot, I would have saved millions when I exited. So something that's really key for people that are listening is, and whether you're looking at going into business or you already are in one, from experience, get the legal advice and the accountant advice that Rob's talking about, because you might start off as the intention to be just one cafe, but you might have opportunities down the track to open 2, 3, 4 and multiples, and the way you set up will be relevant to that, and of course will deeply not only affect you from a legal point but from a taxation point. And then the other one I want to explore on the back of that, because you touched on it, is partnerships, shareholder agreements.
Yes, yeah.
The importance, talk us through in simple terms the importance of a shareholder agreement.
So I'm a litigator by trade, so I litigate in the courts throughout Queensland and Australia, and I love people who don't have shareholders agreement, because that just means litigators make lots of money, because once again, as your lawyer, I'd say to you, before you enter into a company with other shareholders, have a shareholders agreement that spells out exactly what those rights are, what the obligations are, and more particularly, what happens if there is a breakdown in the relationship, how you resolve disputes, or if it comes to it, what happens if you can't, if it's intractable, if you have to buy people out, what's the mechanism of buying people out, what the valuation is. Yeah. Without it, unfortunately, the law's a very blunt instrument, and ultimately a judge might go, you guys can't sort it out yourselves, I'm going to wind this company up.
Yeah, and you don't want to get to that stage.
Everyone loses.
Yeah.
So a shareholders agreement, if you're going to have a corporate structure, probably with, I'll call them strangers, not your spouse or something. That's a different area of the law, which I also deal with, but we won't deal with that today. But with strangers, a shareholders agreement for the sake of probably $2,000 or $3,000.
Yeah, it's very inexpensive, but it can get expensive.
I can tell you, litigator, for me to even to open my file in a litigation matter, the court filing fee is $3,000.
There you go.
So so it's just a no-brainer.
So it's even the easiest litigation would be north of 10,000.
Oh, any litigation is 10,000 would be probably in the magistrate's court, with the magistrate being nice to you on your side with one day,
right up to the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
No.
And again, and it's a classic saying, right? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. How do you know a good proactive lawyer? Well, they're not very wealthy, because a good proactive lawyer doesn't get paid a lot to save you from the big bucks that get spent later on if you don't have everything in place. Is that fair?
Oh, look, I'm a litigator by trade, but I couldn't think of anything worse to wish upon anyone to be involved in litigation. It actually means litigation comes from probably the Latin Italian litigate, to bind together. So you're bound with a person you hate for years, spending money on lawyers. It's
There you go. I couldn't have said it better. Key takeaway there, always plan for the worst case scenario. Get onto your lawyers and get a great shareholders agreement if you're looking at going into partnership. And if you are in partnership but don't have a shareholders agreement, then you should be picking up that phone or sending an email to Rob and the team at Hill House straight away to get a shareholders agreement. I can tell you now firsthand, I've got 4 of my GMs own 20% of the coffee commune that we have given to them in good stead as an exec team. And we have shareholders agreements in place, and we have the right agreements in place that are always planning for the worst case scenario, because without them, it's no good for them, and it's certainly no good for myself or my wife. Rob, are there specific legal requirements or regulations that cafe owners should be aware of before they open their establishment?
Yes, there are.
We're going to be talking about IP compliance and stuff, but look, generally?
There certainly are. And interestingly, cafe, the food industry, it's a very heavily regulated environment. All business is in Australia anyway, but when you're dealing with members of the public, which obviously you are,
so public liability.
Public liability. You're inviting people onto your premises to eat food which is prepared in your premises. So there's all that food regulation, all the food hygiene stuff, all that. Often there'll be, you need a license if you're going to have seats outside.
Correct.
If you're gonna serve liquor, which some people do, that's another
responsible service of alcohol licensing.
All that. It's an extraordinarily regulated environment, and particularly if you're starting up in the industry, it's probably almost impossible, I suspect, without a good lawyer, good accountant, speaking to someone like yourself, Phil, who's been involved in the industry, where there's organisations that. Just getting that insight into how complicated it is.
And it was a bit of a loaded question because, of course, and the reason I asked that question that way is for this. A lot of people say to me, "Oh, why do I need a lawyer? It's just a cafe." Well, you've just heard it. There are so many parts of the law that are affected with you owning any business, let alone a cafe, especially around liability and protecting yourself. Remember, forewarned is forearmed is forewarned. Forewarned is forearmed. Put out sparks, don't put out fires. You can use 100 different sayings. Protect yourself, because you might think it's expensive, and you're going to hear this throughout the whole podcast. People generally think that lawyers are expensive. I tell you what, they're cheap compared to what it becomes later. Remember what I said? A good proactive lawyer, because they're not walking around earning squillions and millions of dollars, because the money gets made by lawyers when there's litigation.
Absolutely.
It gets done when you're not protecting yourself. So spend the money up front and get protected is going to be something that hopefully resonates through this. Let's talk IP. So intellectual property can be a concern for cafe owners, right? Especially when it comes to branding and menu creations. How can cafes protect their intellectual properties?
Well, look, that's a very interesting question, and quite a specialised area too. Intellectual property, certainly, look, trademarks is certainly something to approach. They're not particularly difficult to get in Australia. They do have some. They're a little bit to protect yourself after if someone infringes. It's a different story, but certainly to have it. The menu creations certainly are very interesting. So you have your copyright laws and things like that. Probably. You have to be a little bit proactive of thinking. When you raised this question with me this morning, I hadn't it's probably a fairly interesting area of the law when someone does it, because things called moral rights. So if, for example, I had a Phil Di Bella, so I had a Di Bella coffee, that the moral, you mightn't have, Di Bella mightn't be a trademark brand, probably is, but
it is,
just say hypothetically it wasn't, it was just your name, you're Phil Di Bella 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And I thought, Phil's doing well, doing his thing. I'll call my coffee Di Bella.
Yeah.
Well, you'd be able to say, legally, that I have some moral rights in relation to my name.
Yeah.
That's right, and I've been using my name in this industry, and you're deliberately passing off.
Yeah.
There's an action called passing off, where in that scenario, Robert Lamb using Di Bella coffee.
Yeah.
25 years ago, now you'd have a pretty good case, but 25 years ago, you'd have to prove that Di Bella was well known in the coffee industry, and Robert Lamb using Di Bella is actually trying to pass off as Di Bella.
Yeah.
But and for people starting off, that's the position they're going to be in. But taking the formal steps of trademarks, copyright,
logo registration.
Keeping an eye on things too, just keeping an eye on them, being a little bit proactive about perhaps what people are doing.
And that's a key one, because on the flip side, a lot of people get caught. I'll never forget, and I won't mention names, but of who it was, but 30 years ago, there was a predominant cafe in New Farm that was firing on all cylinders, and they were probably the first person in Brisbane, probably maybe even Australia, but definitely Brisbane, to do a Frappuccino. Okay. Now, you can imagine where this is going, right? 30 years ago, they're doing Frappuccino, and great, awesome, and they're new to Brisbane, and away they go, and 6 months in, they get tapped on the shoulder by obviously Starbucks, because they got a global trademark and rights on the word Frappuccino, and no one can use that without Starbucks. Obviously, if they find out, you're in a lot of trouble. So obviously, as time's gone on and progressive, it's a lot harder to register things. So if anyone's listening to this saying, I've got something unique and registering it, before you deep dive and spend a lot of money, I think you get the right legal advice and and get the right advice in general, because it's gotten much harder to register certain things.
Yes,
as the years have gone on, right, as stuff comes out and the rest of it. But I remember one of the key ones, using a practical example, was a Di Bella coffee, and I don't own Di Bella coffee anymore. A lot of people still think I do, but I don't. I registered the words, it's not just a bag of beans. And that was a real big brand promise of the company, is it wasn't just about coffee. So we registered the words, it's not just a bag of beans. And then the other one, which I didn't think we'd get away with, and this is a great example on the back of what you said, Nespresso is known for what else? So Nespresso's tagline or mark is what else? Okay. And what I got away with, which I never thought I would, and I did it as a bit of a cheeky thing, but it got approved, was Di Bella coffee, nothing else.
Okay.
But I had to use, but where I got clever with it is I actually used the mark of Di Bella coffee ... nothing else. So again, just a few practical examples on the back of what Rob has shared. Get some good legal advice, because again, it can save you up front down the track on both sides, whether you're the person getting tapped on the shoulder saying, hey, you've ripped off my legal requirements, because let's face it, you're the lawyer in the room. It costs you money to defend yourself too, doesn't it?
Oh, well, as you say, those people defending themselves, Starbucks, they probably would have just given up, because there's something like Starbucks.
Well, they conceded straight away, because they got lawyer advice, but then they conceded because there's nowhere to go.
But if there's a proper fight about it, and as Phil said, often the advice is, look, just have a go. Put it in there, put the trademark in there, put the application in there. The worst they can say is no, and if it gets through, then you've got the...
And it's quite ineffective, right? What are you looking at for something to do a pre-lodgement?
I think it's like hundreds, like $400 or $500.
And then the lawyer fees, it's not that much.
Yeah, no, it's,
So if you're thinking of IP, wrapping that one up, if you're thinking of IP, reach out to the guys. The team at Hill House can help you. Any good lawyer, you've got a lawyer already you're happy with, use your lawyer that you're happy with. But just reach out and ask the question, because, again, it's all about being proactive. You're going to hear it through this. Proactive is going to save you money in the long run. Let's talk compliance. So what are the legal steps that cafe owners should take to ensure that they're compliant with the health and safety regulations, especially now, because COVID's turned a lot of things upside down, some right, some bad, but what are the legal steps that owners should take to make sure that they're compliant with health and safety? especially post-COVID?
Yeah, look, once again, it was an interesting question you posed, and I did a bit of research on it, and it's very, generally speaking, as a business owner, there's a general compliance about your employees and workplace health and safety and all that sort of thing. But to answer your question, certainly in relation to cafe owners, it's that the labelling of food, or at least as we've been here, and I encourage people to come and have their breakfast at Coffee Commune on Saturday morning. I brought my wife here the other day. It's gorgeous. But once again, they'll ask you, are you allergic to this? Yep. And there's a bit of proactive, on the person as well. But in this culture that we have, which lawyers are to blame for somewhat, sometimes you'll label the food, particularly if you're selling food. You'll ask the questions.
We'll put it on menus as well.
Put it on, yes, menus, yeah. The other things, I suppose, there are very specific requirements for, labelling food and under the codes and things like that. I suppose that's probably the main thing from a cafe point of view.
And the key to that one area, Rob, from experience is asking, right? Is encouraging and training your team to ask the question. And I think that's a key takeaway in that space with that question for anyone listening, is make sure that your team is asking the question, because it shows a duty of care.
Yes.
And duty of care is the most important thing when it comes to that space, right?
That's right, because one of the questions you will get asked, whether it's informally or formally, or hopefully not in the witness box, is what did you ask the customer before you gave them something that they had an anaphylactic shock in relation to? So as Phil said, if you can say, well, I asked them, are they allergic to eggs?
Correct, and it's on our menus.
That's right.
And you'll see, and this will explain even to listeners listening why you'll see so much disclaimer around this may contain nuts.
Yep.
And you'll see it on some labels that you think, well, what's nuts doing in that factory, or what's nuts doing? But they have to put it there as a disclaimer for duty of care.
Yeah.
And that'll help the listeners understand why, why there is so much, let's say, some people call it red tape. It's not really red tape, but why there's so much focus on that. We have to be careful, and it's coming back to everyone's trying to negate their duty of care.
And it's also being proactive, as you say.
Totally.
So you can say that. Yeah.
So tell me, in terms of permits, it's amazing how many people I speak to that don't understand, what do you mean I need a permit or a license? And you touched on some of them before, especially around if you're going to be a licensed venue, you need a lawyer, right? You need a lawyer, full stop. But if you're looking at license, or you are licensed and you've never engaged a lawyer, I suggest you get an audit done, because you need it. The compliance stuff is gone out of control. Yeah. Again, I've been in this industry for 32 years. 33 years now. The compliance and how things have changed is crazy, right? Tell us, what are some of the things that come to mind?
Well, in relation to cafes, restaurant, that sort of area, as Phil said, liquor is a completely different thing, and as I say, get a lawyer. There's also your food licenses. You need food and hygiene,
which some people don't get and still don't understand.
You'll need, I think, as you know, you'll need a food supervisor. There has to be someone
registered supervisor.
That's right. You need, depending where you're operating, if it's a food stall or a mobile truck, you're going to need those sort of licenses. Insurance
is a big one. Some people don't even have public liability insurance.
We'll probably talk a bit more about insurance, but not. Well, would you want to touch on it?
Yeah, let's go. Let's go for it.
Insurance is probably the most important thing you'll do, because at the end of the day, we're all human. We all make mistakes. Our staff make mistakes. The customers make mistakes, whatever. Most sane people listening to this would not drive their motor vehicle without it being insured, at least third party.
Totally.
Speaking of someone who parked pretty close to a Lambo the other day.
Yeah. I hope you didn't damage it. My wife's driving that at the moment because hers is damaged.
But it would just be insane not to do so. So there's the types of insurance you'll have, as Phil mentioned, public liability insurance. So if someone slips over in your restaurant, you're on their way to the toilet, and you get a letter from one of the usual suspect lawyers, which is fine, they're doing their job. Then your heart will skip a beat, but at least then you can pick up the phone to the insurer. You have, if you're serving your food, you'll have that sort of insurance with your public liability. Make sure you read your policy. Make sure it covers what you want it to cover. Then they're not that difficult to read at the end of the day. Obviously, get the advice if you need to, but read the policy yourself as well. If you've got staff, you need workers' compensation insurance or the equivalent whatever state you're in. That's not particularly difficult to get a hold of either, and it's mandatory, of course. You may also have things that you don't think about, like your own insurance. So what happens if you get sick?
Correct.
Yeah. I've taken advantage of personal TPD insurance myself. It's been very useful for me in my personal life. If it's being all hangs on yourself. If you've got other directors, what happens if one of them gets sick or dies?
Directors' insurance is a big one.
Yeah, like buyout. Once again with those agreements, a buy-sell agreement. If one of your directors dies, you don't necessarily want to be in business with their partner. You just want the insurance to pay their estate out, and then you take their shares. That sort of structure.
Some good advice, yes.
Yeah. So certainly there's a lot of insurance to be had. A good insurance broker's an excellent person to know as well. And we've all had that experience, I'm sure, where we run into someone's car or vice versa, and you go, "Oh, at least I've got
insurance is going to touch any of us. If you went through the floods and all the rest of it, some are going to be good, some are not going to be good. I think the key there is read your policy. If you're not sure about the policy, get a good lawyer to look over the policy, obviously, because they're going to be. And that's why I said proactive law is completely different to reactive law. Yes. Again, I said it from the start. You're going to hear me say some of these things all the way through. Proactive. If you've taken anything away from this, on the Been There and Done That podcast here, it's all about being proactive with legal responsibility, because the last thing you want to do is be reactive, because it's going to cost you. I'll be brave and say it'll be at least 5 times more, if not more, in trying to be reactive when it comes to the law. Yeah. Let's talk leasing. I've got one question only, because we've had a leasing dedicated specialist on the show, but from a lawyer's perspective, tell me, what are the important legal considerations from a lawyer's perspective in terms of leases?
So, once again, I own the business as well. I'm a lessee in a lease, and it's probably up there with the most important obligation you'll have in your business. Your personal backside is on the line, as it were. So, and I don't profess to be an expert like Phil in the industry, but as probably, and not quite legal advice per se, and Phil can correct me, but particularly if you're starting out, it's probably a good idea to have a shorter term at the beginning.
Correct, yes.
With an option, with a longer option. So if you're doing well after the year or two, you then have the opportunity to go, right, well, I can now have 5 years with another 5-year option.
Correct.
Rather than having a 5-year option at perhaps not going so well in the first couple of years, and you've got another 3 years to go, and usually got a personal guarantee attached.
And that's the legal requirement there, right?
That's right.
You're legally on the line.
Well, that's right, and it's your house on the line, and that's how people really, unfortunately in the restaurant, the cafe business, it is quite a volatile business. Yeah. And if something's going to go bad, you don't necessarily want to go everything to go down with you, if you know what I mean. So certainly the term of the lease is very important. Craig Hong, one of my partners who raised something to mention today, is take good care, certainly of what your outgoings are, but also whose obligation the maintenance is.
Yeah, maintenance is a big one.
Yeah, and not so. It's, of course, it's. You want to be explicit about whose obligation is. So, Craig's example was this: if there's no obligation as to who maintains the air conditioning, so usually the air conditioning is the landlord's problem because it's part of the building.
Correct.
And
part of the capital.
Correct. But if there's no obligation on the landlord to go, Mr. Landlord, you must fix the air conditioning, it might cost $100,000 to fix air conditioning.
Yeah.
So the landlord goes, "Oh well." And
legally, the landlord can just sit there and do nothing. That's right.
That's exactly the point. And if you're in Queensland, so in about 2 months' time,
affects your business.
You have to get it fixed because you're not going to have any customers.
Yeah.
So it's little nuances like that that
and it brings in the P word again. Proactive.
That's right. Being proactive. So and having the person with the experience to the commercial lawyer saying, "Have you thought about this?
Yeah.
This isn't this person's obligation. Let's negotiate now."
Yeah.
And it doesn't, as I say, just say some certainty.
Two key takeaways from their listeners, from great advice there from Rob, is one, remember this: no one opens a business with the intention to go broke. So get comfortable with the worst case scenario. The trend used to be, there used to be value in a lease. Yes, now remember what this, listeners, there used to be big value in a lease. So people used to say, I want a 10 by 10 or I want a 5 by 5. That's gone out the window. I'll tell you where the value of a lease is right now from 32 years of experience. It's a 1 year with a 5 plus 5 year option.
Yep.
So it gives you 1 year, and I can, and I've been there personally. I'll explain that in a minute. It's a 1 year with a 5 by 5 year option, because if you don't do that, then you have got a lot more on the line. The second part is the proactive approach to your leasing. Good time to look at your lease if you haven't. We've got a leasing dedicated episode on being there and done that you explores this a lot more. But you need to have a proactive, because Rob's brought up a very, very good example there, and thank you, Craig, for that input, is that if it's grey, then the landlord sits in idle. Now, you sit in idle, they sit in idle, but who does it affect? It's not going to affect the landlord. No. It's going to affect you and your business operation. You couldn't have given a better example. Now, the 1 year plus a 5 year option and 5 year option after that. Personally, I had a business. We trialled a new concept. The concept worked revenue-wise, but didn't it work expense-wise. So 1 year, we opened that business, and then a year after we weighed up whether it was worth to keep or not to keep, and we ended up shutting it down without losing any money. Yeah. We were making money in the year, but we thought that the return of investment didn't match where it was going, and it wasn't enough to risk another 5 year option. Now, had we not done the 1 year with a 5 plus 5, then we would have been liable for that next 5 years. So if you're thinking of starting a new business or you're looking at expanding, that's a great little tip there, is perhaps take a 1 year option, a 1 year lease with a 5 by 5 year option, and try and get as much of that next 5 years cemented into the lease. Because the other thing is that, and I had somebody take this advice and they had it blow up in their face because they took a 1 year and then it didn't have the particulars in the 5 year option, and the rent, because they'd done really well, the rent was going to go through go through the roof. So guys, get proactive advice again, and a 1 by 5 by 5 or a 1 by 3 by 3 is great, but make sure you lock that next term in as well. Let's talk employment. I know you love this area. We had you at a long lunch, which was a great success, and it was all about employment law. Let's take a couple of key things for the listeners. How can cafe owners protect themselves from potential legal disputes with employees, such around wages and hours issues and workplace safety concerns, which is a big one right now? How can we get listeners to be proactive and protect themselves?
So if you're going to start up a new business, or perhaps even in the industry, I would recommend just reading the fast food award and or the restaurant award, depending on your particular, whatever your
business is.
Yeah. Just, they're not particularly long documents. I think they're probably about 12 pages long. They're fairly, all the awards are fairly similar. There's some nuances. But just getting to know that award and getting to know the pay rates as well. The way you really stuff it up, I suppose, is you either don't comply with the award, particularly for a long period of time, and you have people you've been underpaying, and not on purpose. But
often it's not on purpose.
No, that's right.
It's a lack of knowledge.
The trouble with the trouble's the wrong word, but one of the dilemmas I can't think of the right word, but Australian employment law is really complicated.
Yeah, it is.
It's there's probably there's 200 awards for a start, so you got to work.
Which is part of the problem that I've been advocating.
Yep, and I'm an employer as well, as is Phil, as I'm sure most of some of the listeners are, and if you're going to operate in your business, you probably will end up being. And you've got to make sure you comply, otherwise it's your fault at the end of the day. Yeah,
ignorance is not an excuse in the law, right?
No, and whilst they're very fair in the Fair Work Commission, they are a very good organisation. All the people there are very good and very just. They're still bound by the law. And it's quite easy for a disgruntled employee, rightly or wrongly, to make that application and do those things. So I would certainly be familiar with the awards. If you're uncertain, talk to Hill House, talk to an employment lawyer, there's places like Employ Sure that can help you.
But remember this, listeners. Ignorance is not an excuse and will not be accepted by Fair Work. They will be fair. I know firsthand, but they can only. You said it really well before. They're bound by the law, and ignorance doesn't allow them to say, "Hey, we're okay with this." the key takeaway out of what Rob said was right at the beginning. Get across the award. If you're in doubt, there's organisations that can help you. There's legal establishments like Hill House. There's the Coffee Commune that can help. All of our members have access to, IR and HR support through the National Retail Association hotline. Don't use ignorance as an excuse, because there's plenty of support and help out there. And yes, it is, for those listening going, but bloody hell, yes, it is complicated. We know that. But we can't change the 200 awards, but we need to be across them.
And I'd say if you're going to do something drastic with an employee, so either terminate them or change.
Good segue to the next question.
Yeah. Just talk to, as Phil said, your professional people, whether it's a lawyer or as people in the space, because you can really do things that are really backfire, and they can.
Okay, so that's the proactive. That was my next question, right?
Yeah.
So because I want to talk it in two parts.
Yeah.
One is proactive, right? What steps should cafe owners do before they terminate an employee or deal with a difficult situation, whether that's customer or anything, right? That's a proactive approach. So simple answer is get the advice.
Just look, there's ways to do those things.
Yes.
And
there's a process.
That's right. That process is exactly right. If, as Phil said, I said, the Fair Work Commission are very fair, and there's quite defined processes both in the legislation and in the policies that they operate under. But if you deviate from that process, and as Phil said, just because you don't know about it, it's not an excuse. And it's about fairness. It's about giving the person that you're going to terminate or deal with or whatever a chance to explain the situation, to otherwise, why it shouldn't happen or what their side of the story is.
Yeah.
That's what generally it's about. But there are certain things like you can't, and no one's suggesting for a minute that any sort of normal, rational person would do this, but you can't take action against people, for a discriminatory reason, or fire someone because they're of a certain race or something like that.
But you can't even fire somebody straight away. It doesn't matter how emotional you get about it. You can't fire someone for turning up to work late.
Oh, no.
Either.
Yeah. Probably. Look, and there's even cases, as say, just speaking sort of a bit, like even punching your boss sometimes isn't enough to get you fired straight away. Like there's
crazy,
cases
right?
about that. Yeah, look, once again, most cases you punch your boss, you're going to be. But
or you're going to get if you're on casual, you're not going to get many hours.
There is a case. It's a railways worker, I'll put it that way, who punched his boss, and he was reinstated. So, because fairly unionised, it was a while ago, but but look, it's certainly just get the advice. Don't just react straight away, because there's ways and means of doing it, which will probably save you a bit of heartache and going up to the Fair Work
So let's go to the flip side. So someone right now listening is finding themselves in an event that there's going to be a legal dispute. What advice would you give to them?
Look, depending on the dispute, I'd probably pick up the phone to a lawyer. You wouldn't be. Most disputes can be solved.
Yeah.
Most disputes can be. People don't really. Both sides of the equation don't want to be in a legal dispute. Don't want to be in a legal fight. There's no upside except for lawyers. But
you heard that first coming from a lawyer, and that's why I respect you and I respect Hill House, because you're not going to hear that advice from a lot of people, right? What you just said there, only 5% of lawyers would ever say that, right? And I really appreciate that, and I'm sure the listeners do too. Yeah,
and I couldn't afford myself. Yeah. If I was involved in litigation, I couldn't afford myself. So, let alone a normal person trying to run a business, and it's not
you don't
just
need a headache.
Well, it's not just money. It's if you're involved in litigation, I'm going to have you in my office probably 1 or 2 days a month for about 6 months, and then we're going to prep for mediation probably. That's another couple of days. You're going to meet the barrister. Then you're going to spend a day or two at mediation. Then if it doesn't settle, then we're going to prep for court. That's probably another 2 months out of your life. Yeah. Like in about a year, you'll probably spend about 3 weeks in my office in the courtroom. And then, and I've never had the pleasure, thank goodness, but you'll be in the witness box. Then that's probably right up there with,
And it's not only just a financial strain, it's an emotional strain. Emotional for yourself, emotional for the family and those around you. And it's not a distraction you need. So just be proactive. If in doubt, pick up the phone, ring the commune, contact Hill House, whatever it is, just get proactive. You're listening to this, you're not sure, pick up the phone.
I'm happy to talk to anyone. I think I've demonstrated this, I think,
mate,
with you.
You've been
Phil,
great for our membership. You've worked with a lot of our community, and you still do, and that's why we love it, because you give great advice, and it's not about the dollar. You guys are very proactive, and we respect and appreciate that. Let's talk supply agreement. I got one question around this because it has affected many people I know, but it affected a really good, and I don't want to mention brands, but it affected a really thriving brand that started doing well, opened multiple stores, and then their supplier let them down because they had a unique product, no agreements in place, and ultimately it led to the demise of this brand in Australia. So tell me about key contracts and agreements for somebody who's got unique products from suppliers. Let's talk supplier agreements. What's the best way to go about that, and the importance of supplier agreements, especially when you've got you're purchasing unique products for your business that could ultimately sink you?
Well, I think it depends on the power dynamic to some degree, because once again, the advice is get the advice before you sign it. But of course,
have a supplier agreement in place.
Well, of course, I suppose take it as written that there's going to be something there, and we're talking about a written document. But the issue can be like leases a little bit, is as the owner, or as the person going to the supplier with perhaps a unique product, is you haven't quite got the power that you might have to need it. But certainly, as Phil says, the terms of the agreement need to spell out exactly what's going to occur, when it's going to occur, what happens if it doesn't occur. So
that's the key one.
Yeah.
I'll talk through an example in a minute.
Yeah. So is it going to sound in money? Because it mightn't just be, if I haven't supplied you with, commune coffee, well, I just owe you a bag of coffee. Well, no, I just had, when I didn't have that bag of coffee, therefore I couldn't open my restaurant. I didn't sell,
and this is my damages.
Yeah, that's right. So how do the damages flow, and how are they assessed? The personal liability under those agreements on the flip side. So if it's probably a little, probably not quite as drastic in supply agreements, I suspect, if it's just a transactional one. An automatic renewal? Does it automatically renew?
Yeah, and we've seen people get caught with coffee companies, and I won't mention them, but it's a very public stash that I was having with one of Australia's largest coffee brands around that. They've got I don't know if they've still got it, but they used to have an automatic 6-month renewal.
Yes.
If you didn't contact them to tell them you're terminating at the end of the term, it rolled over for another 3 years.
Often with a CPI or worse.
Correct, which is worse. And again, I haven't mentioned any names, but I'm sure a lot of listeners could work out who it is. But and we're instrumental in pushing that agenda when I owned Di Bella Coffee. It was all about check your supply agreements from suppliers. We didn't actually have one from a Di Bella point. That was our point of difference.
Yes,
we work every day to secure your supply. We don't sign you up and stitch you up and forget about you, but that's another point. So that's a great point you made there.
Yeah. So, look, once again, I suppose, read the document, make sure you understand it, make sure it's important to you, and if in doubt, talk to someone who knows.
And there's key elements there, right? And like I said, what are the action items if it doesn't go right? Yeah. So let me talk through the importance. So the supply agreement I had with a takeaway cup company, and I was obviously one of the biggest customers they had, and it was a great supply agreement because it was for both, right? If the Australian dollar came down under a certain level, it would enact an automatic price increase for us because obviously they'd be out of pocket. But if the Australian dollar went up, and this is when the dollar was above parity, then the pricing would stay the same. But the big one was this, because they were branded cups. If at any time cups, without any obviously given reason, became out of stock, meaning it was human error, someone forgot to place the cup order from their perspective, from their end, or something went wrong with their manufacturer, and again, this was an acts of God and all the rest of it, then we would have cups at no charge until the branded ones came back in. Okay. And the reason we did that, and what I put on there, so there's a second part to this, was so that I would pass that on free of charge to our customers. So it wasn't so that I would make 100% of the profit. So, I'm still charging my customer, but I'm getting free cups from the supplier. No. The thing was that if the cups didn't have our brand on it, we got them for nothing, and I would give them to our customers for nothing. Okay. And only once in about 10 years of this agreement and relationship that we had, which was a great relationship, and again, I'm not mentioning brands, we had a great relationship with them. Only once did that come into play, and they warranted exactly what happened. But on the same side, when the dollar dropped under at at parity. The US dollar dropped back down to in the 90s. We paid more for our cups. So it was a really what I called a great supply agreement because it protected the supplier and it protected us as well. So, tying in everything that you've mentioned.
So it's putting some thought into those agreements, what they're actually for, isn't it?
Correct.
It's not purely transactional.
Yeah. Well, as you know, the lawyer's job is to sort of put it all together. My job as the business owner is to know how it's going to impact my business so that you could write the appropriate document, which is a great tip there for listeners. Is the law? It's not the lawyer's job to think of the issue. It's their job to put it all together based on your knowledge of your industry and what happens to you if things happen.
We'll certainly try, but that's right. We can't have the in-depth knowledge that people have of their particular industries. That's right.
Of course. Yeah. So let's talk legislation changes.
Oh, yes.
Because governments love changing things, especially when without consultation. And the recent one, as you've heard me bang on about, is government, even though we've got 3% unemployment and everyone's short of staff, the government comes along and says, well, international students can only work 24 hours a week now. And that's effective in 6 weeks' time. Not from now. This was ages ago, right? So these are some of the legislation changes that our lovely governments love to put on us. What are some of the emerging legal trends and changes that people need to be aware of? And I know you spoke about this at the lunch not so long ago.
So look, the major ones that I know about are the employment ones.
Yeah, correct.
But certainly...
Well, that's the biggest expense for a cafe. So any cafe owner or restaurant, because you'll come from professional services, which is a bit different. But our biggest expense in the cafes and restaurants, and it's the do or the don't, the die component, is wages.
Yeah. And probably actually ours would be too, I think. Because, I think, ours would be too. Yeah. Because we're professional services, so you're paying lawyers and stuff. Yeah. Just what I remember, Phil, one of the law lecturers said to me years ago when I did law, but in the first 10 years in Australia, there was about half a bookcase of legislation. And I think when I did law, so back in the 90s, 1 year in 97 was 4 bookcases.
Isn't that crazy?
And that was 97, that's 20 years ago. Yeah. And just...
Can you imagine now?
Oh, well,
there'd be a football field full of it.
People don't... This is interesting too, that legislation isn't just an act of parliament, it's also the regulations of that legislation, and there's also policies that the particular government department uses. For example, the ATO, private rulings, public rulings. So there's actually like a few tiers of legislation, inverted commas. But anyway, coming back to my...
emerging trends, legal trends.
The employment, so the employment, say, probably the big one is proactive about sexual harassment policies.
Yeah, big one.
Which is a good thing, of course.
Especially in the cafe industry and restaurant industry, because, like I said, I've been in this industry over 30 years. There's been some well-needed and changes over the years in this area.
And that's right. So it's not just enough for if you see something happening, you go, you do something about it. Or someone makes a complaint and you do something about it. It's you as the business owner are proactive about it, and that usually involves policies and usually involves some sort of information in the legal context. Like a law firm context, like a meeting, a staff meeting about it, perhaps with an expert or something like that. So you actually have to, if something happens, you have to show you've been proactive about it.
That word again, proactive. If you're not across this, you need to look it up. You can get it on government websites and all the rest of it. If you don't want to engage a lawyer, or hey, if you've got a few things to talk to a lawyer about, get engaged a lawyer.
Yeah, and that's probably one of the major changes that.
What about the psycho-safety stuff that's happening?
Look, certainly there's always been an obligation on employers to ensure that their employees are safe at work, but it appears both through the changes in legislation and the way it's being interpreted is that there now is a proactive obligation to ensure that a person's mental health is protected in the workplace. And that stems from the anti-bullying, and once again, all these changes are excellent in theory and all come from a good place, but it's the way they're implemented, and if you're a small business owner, you might be one or two, you might have 2 or 3 staff, but you're expected to behave and react and have the same policies and procedures as Woolworths.
Yeah, which is crazy.
Yeah, so that's.
But again, ignorance is not a defence.
No, it's not. But it comes from a good place. But it's the implementation.
And as I put it, I can say this: you can't, right? The intention's good, but the execution is shit. And we'd wish that local, state, and federal government. That's why I do a lot of stuff, and it's a big part of the coffee commune, the advocacy part, right? And that's why I get involved in politics to advocate for our industry. What sometimes starts off in, and most times does start good intention, isn't executed well because they just don't work with industry. And again, if you've got any politicians listening to this, or you'd like to share it with a politician or they're a family member, just get them to be proactive. Get them to talk to industries like the coffee commune, hotel industries. There's all different bodies that they can speak to and involve in. And here's the key, but how about talking to industries that don't take government contracts or take government money? Because we certainly don't at the coffee commune. It's purely funded by myself and my wife, and we're proud of that. But it gives us the autonomy to speak and really help our industry. And I said, you can't really say that I can. You've got legal obligations. I don't in certain areas. But the intention is good. The execution is poor. Be proactive. That's the solution. Talk to industry. Because as Rob said, your good intentions can be executed pretty poorly because the example you gave is perfect. How can an operator with, say, 3 or 4 employees or even 10 employees have the same obligation and expectation of a Woolworths who's paying their legal fraternity probably $1 million? The head of legals is probably on $1 million and the rest of the team's on a couple of $100,000. So they just don't have the same resources.
No, that's right.
But again, ignorance is not a defence, listeners, so you need to be proactive in this space. So on that part, what are the resources or organisations? If somebody says, look, I can't really afford a lawyer right now, which is fair because a lot of people can't. Obviously, the coffee commune is one area that can help. But what are other places? What are websites or go-tos that they can really...
Look, as crazy as it sounds, and it's 2023, like Google searches are an extraordinarily...
Powerful.
Like, without, and look, you've got to be a bit careful, obviously, like Dr. Google and all that sort of thing.
You don't want to become Dr. Google,
no,
but for general advice, not specialised advice.
And it's about, as Donald Rumsfeld said, you're unknown. So if you can at least clarify what it is you don't know,
that's good advice.
Then you can seek the advice, whether it be from, a fellow cafe owner like Phil, or your accountant, or your lawyer, or just start to demystify what you perhaps don't know. But the dangerous things are what you don't know. And
ignorance is not a defence.
No, that's right. No, so it's, look, as silly as it sounds, probably at least Googling it and just getting an idea of what's out there, and then the sort of quasi. Industry bodies such as you've mentioned the retail,
National Retail
Association. As I say, I'm at the end of the day, my details would be, if there really is a genuine question, just pick up the phone to me. I'd much rather you spend 5 minutes with me than 5 months with me in a courtroom.
And that's why we love you, mate.
Yeah.
Tell me, what about in terms of, has government got any, I know that our Queensland Small Business Commission is amazing, Dominic Lamb, and she's been on this before. Yeah. So always check that, the Small Business Commission's office. They're always releasing, new stuff and all the rest of it. But is there any other government departments that you know of that have got, obviously the awards stuff can be found
award stuff like the Fair Work Commission's got
Fair Work Commission.
They've got excellent, even the... we're doing a bit of work with the, probably heard about the AMA and the payroll tax stuff. Look, as the government websites are all very good, you just got to know where to find them.
But again, it's general advice, remember that? Except the award stuff. Obviously, the award is the award and you've got to be across it. But let's say, look, there's certain things that as a business owner that you need to be. And cafe owners and restaurant owners listening and anyone in a management position, because it's not just on the owners. If they're paying you as a manager, then you should be expected to have a certain level of knowledge.
And interesting, as you've just reminded me, like there's now often personal liability attached with certain employment stuff. And that's right, as Phil said, if you're just, say there's a sexual harassment incident and you weren't being proactive, there might be some personal liability attaching.
Well, there is in liquor licensing.
That's right. Well, that's a good example. And so same with the employment laws stuff and the workplace health
and I say that
stuff.
because, look, as a manager, if you want to be called yourself a manager, then there are some very, at very least, there is some certain things that you should be across in terms of what the awards are and what the awards are, and sexual harassment and occupational health and safety and all this. Otherwise, why can you? Because what I found lately, Rob, and when I say lately, in the last 3 years especially, is people want to be quick to call themselves managers, but they haven't done the work. Back in my day, I washed dishes for many years before I got to, I started washing dishes for my brother at 14.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't start to teach me how to cook until I was 17. Whereas now if they're in a place 6 months, they want promotions.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that to bag people. I'm just saying, hey, we need to put our hands back on the pulse, put your fingers back on your pulse and slow down a little bit, because people are quick to call themselves experts and they're quick to call themselves managers. I call them 2-minute noodles. Don't be a 2-minute noodle. There are responsibilities, obligations that you have as you climb the corporate ladder, so to speak, whether it's in a cafe, in a restaurant, in hospitality, in any industry. There's responsibilities that come with promotions. Be across those responsibilities.
And they're always getting harder and more onerous. They just are. That's just the nature of the society we're in. That's what governments do. They pass legislation and make more laws because that's what they do.
That's what they do. And ignorance is not a defence, unfortunately. And one of the reasons, again, why Coffee Commune's using its position in the industry to help advocate for change and all the rest of it. In summary, we talked about, where they can get across certain things, which is great. What advice would you give to an aspiring cafe owner regarding the importance of understanding legal aspects? I know we've touched on it, but give us the summary, Rob. The importance of obviously being proactive and all the rest of it.
Probably very general advice, probably not just cafe owners, but everyone. Don't sign anything until you've read it, and if it's really important, until you've spoken to your professional advisors.
Great advice.
Yeah. I love people signing stuff before they read it because I'm a litigator, but don't, it's just, once you've signed it, you're stuck with it. So if particularly your business, probably up there with the most important thing you'll do in your life, certainly can have most important ramifications if you get it right or wrong. Yeah. Talk to professional advisors. Probably understand what your obligations are under the law once you start running a business, once you're up there. Have a plan in place, then talk to, people, listen to podcasts like this, talk to people like Phil, talk to other people in the industry so you get an idea, come to the sessions at the Coffee Commune, get involved in your other people in your industry and how it works and, that sort of thing. And if a problem arises, don't stick your head in the sand, don't react impulsively or instinctively because often, unfortunately, in our society, that might be wrong as a business owner.
You dig a bigger hole.
That's right. You just make it, you send that email. Once again, you send that email that the barrister on the other side is cross-examining you on in the witness box that you sent at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
That you
after a few bottles of wine.
That's right.
Yeah. There's another piece of it. Don't make sure you breathalyse yourself before you send anything to anybody, right?
There's another. Well, on that, just don't. If it's really important and you're really angry, write it, but don't send it. Put it in the drawer. The old advice our parents gave us, I'm sure. Just put it in the drawer and then think about it tomorrow morning.
Yeah, keep the emotion and the ego.
Because emails are just, litigators love them because they're beautiful.
Well, it's all evidence. Everything's based on precedent and evidence.
It's there in black and white. They're just, just don't send it.
And look, mate, Rob, it's been fantastic to have you, and I appreciate you giving up your time and your knowledge. Because remember, your professional services, this is your livelihood. You normally get paid for this sort of stuff. You haven't been paid for this podcast. It's your time you're giving up. And if we work off the traditional 6 minutes increments, I probably owe you a few $1,000s. But no, we'll be, we appreciate you coming in and doing what you're doing. And one of the things that really resonated with me with what you said, and you wouldn't pick this if I got you to guess it, is when you said you couldn't afford you.
No.
In a litigation, and I want listeners to really just think about that. Rob's not, Rob's not the wealthiest man in the world, but he's not the poorest man in the world. And I think that really strung a chord with me and really brought it to life. You have here an amazing litigator who specialises in litigation, right, who's a director of a mid-tier legal firm, has just said these words: I couldn't afford me if I was in litigation. If that doesn't make you want to be or get off your bum to be proactive when it comes to the law and owning a business in general, then I don't know what will. So, Rob, thank you. You've been there, done that. Yep. And we really appreciate your time and everything else. Rob's always a frequent attendee to our events at the Coffee Commune. We'll have him back next year as well as one of our events because there's always new stuff happening in the space of law. Hill House are a great partner of the Coffee Commune, and very proactive in what they do. Rob and his team come along to different events and they're always talking to people and sharing their knowledge. So, Listen to the podcast. All the details will be on the end. Our great producer, Gilberto, from the Podcast Boss, will always do an amazing job in summarising. But if you need anything else, reach out. All the details will be there. Rob Lamb, Hill House Lawyers, his details will be there. Please don't put your head in the sand, like Rob said. Be proactive. Ignorance is not a defence in law, and be proactive in everything that you do in the space. Until next time, this has been Phil Di Bella. Rob, thank you again.
Thank you, Phil.
You've been listening to Phil Di Bella. Been there, done that. Until next time, go be the best you can be.